Win number 7 on the season, win number 100 for Ron Rivera's career. How the Washington Commanders sent the Atlanta Falcons flying back home with a loss right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, Commanders fans, to the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We are your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where, of course, you are joining us potentially live here on this post-game episode. You can also find us on any podcast catcher of your choice and at the WSA 9 Plus app on your Roku or Amazon Fire Stick. We thank you for making us your first listener, your first view every single day, especially after a Washington Commanders win, which is becoming more and more of a normal thing around here these days. I'm David Harrison. My co-host sitting right next to me is Chris the Rooster Russell, both of us credentialed members of the media covering your Washington Commanders. Chris is doing it for the Team 980, where you can find he and Pete Medhurst bright and early, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern, Monday through Friday, or at any time on the Odyssey app. And you can find me writing about your Washington Commanders for Commander Country, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation.
Not as early, but still there and still readily available. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders from here live at FedEx Field is presented by Prize Picks, daily fantasy pick, made easy. Pick between 2 and 5 players. And if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. Trust me, I did it on an NHL power play last week, and I won some money. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKED ON. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code Locked On. All right, David. So the Commanders win a third in a row. It's the second time this year that they've had a winning streak of 3 games, which had not happened since I believe it was 2005 was the number that the Commanders PR department put out, which should tell you everything. 19-13, the final score over the Atlanta Falcons to again improve to 7-5. And we'll start right away with our big takeaway. Look, they almost lost, but there's an old adage that says almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades.
Yeah.
They almost had a hand grenade thrown at them in the fan base, but somehow they dodged it, sidestepped it. Daron Payne got his big old mitt up, and Kendall Fuller came down with an interception in the end zone. It still wasn't over, believe it or not, at that point, even though that was like in the final minute of the game, but somehow, some way, once again, the defense comes up huge.
Yeah, look, there was about 50-something seconds left, I think, when that happened, and the Atlanta Falcons had 3 timeouts. So, Washington Commanders obviously in a running situation. So the Falcons knew, look, we stop them on 3 runs, don't let them get a first down, we'll get the ball back and potentially have a chance for a crazy end-of-game play, which unfortunately we've already seen twice, the potential setup. The Green Bay Packers did it a little bit better than their other opponent did, but fortunately, that didn't come to happen. But, look, I was so confident. This team is building resiliency, and they're showing that they're a team that can grind out the gut-wrenching wins, right? The wins that make you nervous, and sometimes the wins where, let's be honest, Washington fans, you sit out here in the stands here at FedEx Field, you're watching at home or in your favorite bar or wherever you are, and you're going, what? Here we go again. And Ron Rivera got a lot of those questions about here we go again moments early on in the season. But they're 6-1. In the last 7 games. And so those here we go again moments have actually turned into, okay, let's close the door kind of moments. And one thing I want to talk about before we get to the biggest play of the day, obviously, there was a moment there. We're in the press box. And I don't know about the stadium. I don't know about you guys at home. But in the press box, there was a moment where some people were kind of going back and forth saying, do you let the Falcons score? Do you open the door, let them run in for a touchdown, get the ball back? You have time. You have some timeouts left. And you do what you need to do. And you try to put the game-winning field goal basically in position. I don't know what everybody's take on it. Chris, I don't know what your take was on it at the time watching live. My take on it at the time was, you know what? Your defense has been playing lights out and has gotten you basically to this point where we are right now as a team with a winning record, all this stuff. I think you, as a coaching staff, you rely on your defense. You say, you know what, guys? It's your game to go close. We're not going to let anybody score. We're not going to give away points in hopes that we can outsmart and out-trick the opponent. No. We're going to go slam the door shut. And what happens? They slam the door shut.
They needed a touchdown. They didn't just need a field goal. They needed a touchdown and then the extra point to take the lead and ultimately maybe win the game. I don't understand the notion, well, we're just going to let this team score so that we can purposely be trailing instead of trying to do what exactly happened. Now, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. But like you said, to your point, this defense does have a little bit of a neck. And listen, they were getting run over on that final drive. They were not good on that final drive. Now, there was a crazy play with Mariota and his knee down, and was he touched, and this, that, and the other thing that went for, 44 yards or whatever that helped fuel that. But they were getting run over on that drive. They were about to break instead of bending. But this is what great defenses do. They bend, but they don't break, and they either force a field goal, which obviously wasn't an option for Atlanta there, or they create a turnover. They don't just lay down and get trampled on and give away a game. So kudos to this defense. And obviously also Tress Way, kudos to him because the game wasn't over. You mentioned how much time left was on the clock. Even after
About
that
50
interception,
seconds,
they had to, they tried to run 3 timeouts. Boom. Atlanta had plenty of time, 40-ish seconds left. And Tress Way punted one that would have put the Atlanta Falcons, David, at their own 20-yard line.
Yeah.
And instead drew a running into the kicker on 4th and 2. So special teams was not so good earlier in the day, but really good in that particular spot.
Yeah, some nervous moments there at the end of the game because Falcons touchdown and extra point gives them a 1-point lead because Joey Sly missed an extra point. But you know what? All is well that ends well, and the Washington Commanders get the win. Joey Sly lives to kick another day. Thanks to 2 very key plays of the day. Obviously, the interception at the end, tipped by Daron Payne, which I can't help but go back to Jeff Canina, the defensive line coach at the time, the assistant defensive line coach who introduced the volleyball drill during training camp that everybody, I'm not saying we were laughing at it, but we're kind of laughing with it. It was just kind of fun to watch these behemoths of Washington Commanders defensive tackles jumping up and trying to catch and hit volleyballs. But you know what? I mean, the proof is in the pudding. It has worked tremendously. But Chris, we've got 2 plays of the day. What led?
Your play of the day feeds right into the defensive
It
style,
does.
right? Because it comes on the play before, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. My play of the day. So I'll go first. So my play of the day, James Smith-Williams blows up the read option. Marcus Mariota, the Atlanta Falcons are on the Washington 2. Again, trying to go in for the game tying touchdown and then eventually lead to the game winning extra point from kicker Younghoe Koo, who is very reliable on those extra points. And all game long, the Atlanta Falcons have been gashing the Washington Commanders defense on these read options. And Marcus Mariota has been making really good reads, knowing when to pull the ball, when to hand the ball off, where to run, where not to run, all these things. And James Smith-Williams gets into the backfield on this one last read option. Doesn't pull him down. Gets Marcus get the way. And for a moment there, you almost see the Red Sea part, the Red Washington Commanders defense part like the Red Sea. And you're kind of going, oh no, here goes the touchdown. And instead Montez Sweat comes and cleans it up for him. Teamwork makes the dream work, and the Washington Commanders stop him. And that stops him for a 2-yard loss, which then puts the Atlanta Falcons in a situation where if we run the ball, we know the Commanders are selling out for the run. They're a good run defense. Or we can get a little cute, get a little trickery going and try to run a pass play, which they do. And honestly, Marcus Mariota makes the right call. Gabe Burns of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution was in here working on an article before we got recording. We started talking about it. Marcus Mariota actually made the right read. And Cordell Patterson is open and potentially with momentum could actually take that ball into the end zone. But Daron Payne against the volleyball spike, he gets the hand up, gets the ball in the air. Kendall Fuller comes down with it. That's the next play. Mm-hmm. So my play leading up to that, that's my play of the day.
Wait, did he get his left hand up?
You know what? We're just going to say it was left hand up.
Okay.
Let's just go with it. It was left hand up. They're all left hands when you're the Commanders.
There's a song out there.
There is. I've heard of it.
Anyway, sorry, I tried for the cheap laugh. My play of the day is Brian Robinson's receiving touchdown on the first Commanders series of the game. They came out throwing in a off and on rain after it had really rained hard for about an hour and a half or so leading into the game. I was surprised how aggressive they were. I think Scott Turner was like, look, Atlanta's got a bad secondary. They don't have a tremendous pass rush. We need to throw the ball. Let's hit them when they're not expecting us to throw the ball, especially with the weather conditions. So I think it caught Atlanta by surprise, hit Terry McLaurin on the first play of the game for 26 yards off a play action hit. De'Ami Brown for a 17-yarder, and then ultimately threw a right flat pass to Brian Robinson Jr., and he goes in after he trucks a defensive back, and I mean just absolutely bowled him over in open space near the pylon and plunges in for the touchdown, his first career receiving touchdown. Brian Robinson, as a pass catcher, is something we told you about during OTAs, something that the Commanders were criticized for. Why would you take a guy in the third round if he's not a breakaway threat? This is why you would take Brian Robinson in the third round.
Yeah, look, you get Brian Robinson in the open field. He gets a DB on. He said it after the game. He sees the DB and he knows he's got to make a move. He's got to make a guy miss, or he's got to run him over. He decided to go ahead and make him run him over, and it worked, much to that DB's dismay, because he's now on Brian Robinson's highlight reel from his rookie season. But you know what? Brian Robinson's stock probably going up. We'll talk about that here in a minute. We got our stock report. Stock up, stock down. Unfortunately, we hate doing stock down after victories, but we do have to do stock down just because we got to even it out. We got to be holistic here on the Locked On Commanders podcast.
Absolutely. But first, this episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that might interest you, being that you're probably a football fan, that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll be able to find Blocked Forever right now, as available as a bonus on the Locked On NFL podcast feed right now. Blocked Forever is a brand new podcast from former All-Pro NFL offensive lineman Ryan Khalil and Audible. Khalil takes the conversation about football to the next level. He gives football fans an insider's look at the game through the eyes of the greatest players and personalities of all time. He sits down with star players, coaches, former pros across the league to get into the nitty-gritty of what goes on camera and behind the scenes. You'll hear from Christian McCaffrey talk about his love-hate relationship with fantasy football. Who could hate fantasy football unless you're 1-9 like I am? Whew. And Juju Smith-Schuster gives his most honest opinion on other positions and other players around the NFL. New episodes of Blocked Forever will be recorded and released every week ahead of Thursday Night Football. It's available for free on Audible, wherever you get your podcasts. Head over to the Locked On NFL podcast feed for a sneak peek of Blocked Forever, or catch the full series available or anywhere you get your podcasts. Available everywhere now. Audible, get in the game. All right, thanks for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and view of the day. Be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, from the games that matter to the biggest stories in sports. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. It's Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Along with David Harrison, I'm Chris Russell from here at FedEx Field, where the Commanders win 19-13 to improve to 7-5, 3-game winning streak. That's 6 out of 7. And David, we start with our stock up report. Why don't you go first? Because it's a guy that, obviously we're going to talk a lot about, not only on today's episode, but throughout the week, because now that's 3 really good games in a row. Oh, and by the way, he got the game ball from Ron Rivera.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a game ball. He happens to be our cover athlete. I mean, is Brian Robinson Jr., right? First 100-yard game, nearly 20 points in fantasy. Speaking of fantasy football, Christian McCaffrey, not a fan of fantasy. Guess what? Neither is Brian Robinson Jr. I asked Brian Robinson Jr. in the post-game press conference about the work division in the running back room. And, fans, you guys have your priorities. Players have their priorities. Fantasy players, you have your priorities as one. Everyone wants to know who's going to get more touches. Is it going to be AG? Is it going to be Brian Robinson? Who should I start? Who should I bench? Brian Robinson doesn't care. And he says that the running back room, they don't care either. They're just working together to get wins. We have a question in the live chat, actually, that I'm going to address because it just kind of so happens to fit here. We've got who is it? It's Blue Note, right? Why did they pull AG towards the end and put in Jonathan Williams? So we didn't ask Coach Rivera this. Yeah. Well, we do have a press conference with him tomorrow, and potentially that will come up. But here's going to be my best guess, Chris, and I'll let you give your best guess. At that point in the game, you're looking to grind the clock down. Mm-hmm. You want tough yards. You want gains. You want positive gains every single play. But you also want to beat up that Atlanta Falcons defense. Take advantage of the fact that they're already a little bit beat up just from what you've been doing all game long, and keep your defense on the sideline, getting oxygen, getting warmed up, getting breath, so that when they get back on the field, they can make the big plays just like we saw them make. Jonathan Williams fits that bill just a little bit more in relief of Brian Robinson than Antonio Gibson does. So it wasn't so much pulling AG. It was more so using Jonathan Williams to spell Brian Robinson down the stretch, not necessarily pulling AG. So just kind of a semantics view of it.
I agree. And don't forget, even though he hasn't fumbled this year, how much of a problem Antonio Gibson
Got to bring up the fumbles.
Well, I mean, like I'm just being honest. I mean, it's got to be in the back of their mind, a close game, right? You don't want, they know that. You don't want any extra risk. Not that Jonathan Williams can't fumble or Brian Robinson can't fumble. It's just they don't have the history that Antonio Gibson has. So if you're in a close game, you obviously don't want to risk anything. You want to minimize as much risk as possible, which is why you run the ball more, of course, than throwing the football, especially with Taylor Heineke. So that would be my best guess. And listen, Jonathan Williams deserves an opportunity. You guys know, I mean, for those of you that remember from over the offseason, he was like the guy that I kept chirping about, along with Brian Robinson, every time we were out. I think you saw the same thing from both of those guys, if I remember correctly. They were more impressive, quite honestly, for whatever it was worth, than Jared Patterson or even Antonio Gibson. So they deserved an opportunity to be in this particular position.
Absolutely. Real quick, shout out, if you can see, guys, Darren Haynes and Charla McBride from WSA 9, our partners over at Techno, right down there on the field, doing their spots for you guys on WSA 9 News. Anyway, so stock up. Chris, who's got stock going up for you?
The Commanders' offensive line. This kind of feeds into what we were just talking about, and obviously the success of the day. 176 net yards rushing after what they've been able to do the last couple of games. And we don't have to go through all the numbers, but we can in a later episode. And no sacks. Trey Turner was banged up in this game. Obviously, had to be shuttled out for Sadiq Charles at right guard. Again, at right tackle, you got Sam Cosmi and Cornelius Lucas still kind of rotating in and what have you. And it kind of depends on the moment, the sequence, and the situation. That's called depth. That's called depth when you don't lose a lot, when you have to go to your backups. And remember, early in the year, they did lose a lot, especially at center, when they started carving through centers and basically were on their third, fourth center. And they are on their fourth center. And Tyler Larson has solidified, for the most part, that position. Norwell has gotten a little bit better. Charles Leno has been great. But that right side is still in flux to allow no sacks, really not a lot of significant pressure, even without the sacks. And to run for 176 yards rushing is an outstanding job by that entire unit. No,
absolutely, especially with that rotation. Look, that's the sign of a resilient team. I mean, we're talking about the offensive line, but you look at the defense too. No Chase Young, guys step up, and they've been stepping up for most of the season. You lose Cole Holcomb, combination of linebackers and more DBs on the field. You step up and you make it work. No Benjamin St. Juste against the Atlanta Falcons. Granted, it's the Atlanta Falcons. I got it, right? But they still have some talented guys. NFL talent is still NFL talent, and that doesn't come out and become a glaring problem for them. No William Jackson. I don't know if it's direct correlation, but they actually end up getting better. But now we got to look at stock down. Unfortunately, we only have a little bit time left in this segment, so we can do this quickly and a little bit less painful.
All right, Jahan Dotson for me. 3 games back in the fold, really no production in any of the 3 games. 1 target, no catches today. He was great before the injury. He just hasn't been the same since. Don't know if he's still not 100%. He's out there. That's the good news. Maybe he'll get back next week when they probably need him the most in back-to-back games sandwiched around the bye against the New York Giants.
Yeah, perhaps. Hopefully get to see him getting in the role, in a new role sooner rather than later, right? The lead commander he thought maybe Gibson, or he or she actually maybe thought Gibson got hurt. Look, if they did, they didn't announce it. I'll tell you that way. So that's just kind of the way the business works. My stock down is going to be Chase Young, and I know it's going to surprise some people. Look, this defense right now is surrendering less than 22 points more often than not. And the NFL average right now is 21.9 points. Call it 22 points in the NFL. The Washington Commanders have scored 22 points in every game this season right now. Their record would be 8-3-1. They would have tied the Jags. They would have lost to the Lions, Cowboys, and the Eagles, who they already lost to, but they actually would have won more games than they've currently won because of it, and that's a testament to their defense. So the old adage, don't fix what ain't broken. Not saying that Chase Young will make anything worse, but the conversation right now is, do you pay Montez Sweat or do you pay Daron Payne? I think the conversation needs to start being, do you pay Montez Sweat, do you pay Daron Payne, or do you pick up Chase Young's 5th-year option, which would be north of $18 million, not next year, but the year after. So something to start thinking about.
I think you know my answer to that. There is no chance at this point that I'm picking up Chase Young's 5th-year option, but more on that to come certainly as we go through the week and the next couple of weeks. But hey, the boys are playing rejuvenated. meaningful football. They win 19-13 behind us here at Rainy FedEx Field. We'll hand out some Victory Monday game balls coming up here in just a moment. But first, we tell you about our friends at Prize Picks and prizepicks.com. How does it work? Well, you pick between 2 and 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you are going to win. There's different options, of course, that you can roll in, power plays and all that kind of thing. You might want to take a look at the hard-running Jeff Saturdays, the fighting Jeff Saturdays in Indianapolis on Monday night against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and especially Jonathan Taylor for one of your picks. Just a little tip from your friends here at the Locked On Commanders podcast. Again, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry, no competing against other people. It's you versus the Prize Picks projection available. They offer plays on every sport, not just the NFL, college football, the NHL, NBA, and much, much more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. You can do it on the app. You can do it on your web browser. Safe and fast withdrawals available in 30 states, over 30 states, I should say, in the United States and in Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com. Sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit 100, Prize Picks is going to give you 100. If you deposit 50, Prize Picks is going to give you 50. If you enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100.
Wrapping up this Victory Monday episode of the Locked On Commanders podcast. Yes, I know a lot of you are joining us live here on Sunday, but this is the Victory Monday episode because Victory Monday is here. We love Victory Mondays. We also love Victory Wednesdays because those are special as well. But Victory Mondays, I'm not going to say. Victory Mondays are really cool too.
I think I know the answer as to why.
I think you do too. But it's time to hand out game balls. And so real quick, a little quick disclaimer. The defense deserves a game ball. We understand like Daron Payne for getting a hand up, for getting some pressure. Jonathan Allen had some pressure, almost caused what looked to be a fumble initially, was reviewed, ended up being an incomplete pass. I mean, Kendall Fuller for the interception, Montez Sweat sack and tackle for loss. Like, we got it. The defense deserves game balls. James Smith-Williams on the play of the game. Like, we understand the defense. But what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of turn the light on some guys. A couple of them get plenty of shine, but the first guy doesn't really get a lot of shine. And we're going to give him some here.
He doesn't, although we did mention him earlier in the show. But it's
and we got a comment about it, actually.
Exactly. Punter Tressway, who's like, one of the best dudes, salt of the earth. I talked to him for, 10 minutes in the locker room on Wednesday. And it was just like two old buddies catching up and just shooting the you-know-what, and just talking about life and family and, a little bit of football. And I said to Tress, I said, can you believe that when I was full-time on the beat, back in 2014, that's when he got here. I was standing on the sidelines in Tampa at Raymond James Stadium, and I said, who's this Tressway guy? He ain't going to make it, because they were running through punters like they were changing their underwear around here. And here Tressway is all these years later, and he's obviously the stud of the special teams and really
doing
the most reliable guy. So game ball, we do it 3-star style, kind of like they do in hockey. For those of you familiar, game ball number 3, Tressway. He drew the penalty at the end, averaged 42.3, 2 or 3 inside the 20. Overall, the Commanders won the field position battle.
Absolutely, and that was absolutely clutch. Look, the Atlanta Falcons only started one drive this entire game outside their own 25. That was the interception at near the end of the first half. Fortunately, didn't come back to bite the Commanders in the butt, so it's kind of a Mox Knicks type of situation, if you understand Germany. You know what I'm saying? Game ball number 2, going to the ball coach, Ron Rivera, with his 100th career win, going back to his time with the Carolina Panthers. That's regular season and postseason combined. But look, a lot of players were asked about him. Taylor Heineke was asked about him and said, his former favorite locker room was the one in Carolina, and that, of course, was with Ron Rivera. Taylor wasn't here when Ron came here, but eventually, obviously, he joins the team and says now this is his favorite locker room. Kendall Fuller talked about how great of a leader he is, how great of a man he is, and almost to a T, every single one of them talked about, even when he's going through cancer treatments, he's there for his guys. He's there for his team to take that upfront leadership role. So congratulations to head coach Ron Rivera for a 100th career win. Not sure many thought he would get there with Washington, but he got there, and he deserves a game ball.
It wasn't looking good this year, that's for darn sure, but that's what happens when you win 6 out of 7 games. So congratulations to Coach Ron. Listen, we're going to go through the clock management, guys, during the week. Don't worry about it. We all understand it's kind of messy, if not a disaster, but ultimately, to your point, to the player's point, he kept this team together when it would have been easier, to point the finger of blame, to do all sorts of things. Now he avoids a very, very tough decision this week because they won this game. But for now, Ron Rivera has his guys running basically through a proverbial brick wall against second 3-game winning streak of the year, and that hadn't happened around here since 2005. Game ball number 1, I think you guys know where we're going here. Like you said, what do you call it? The cover art, right?
These are cover athletes.
Cover athlete. There you go. Well, Brian Robinson, Brian Robinson Jr., for all the reasons that we talked about already, he finished with 105 rushing yards. That's a 5.8 average, a long of 21, 20 receiving yards, his first career NFL receiving touchdown. The 5.8 average, David, 2.0 yards per carry higher than any particular or previous game average, including last week, which was his high in Houston at 3.8. So 5.8 to 3.8, that's a 2-yard per carry jump. Obviously, he had the big 21-yarder and a couple of other 11, 12-yarders. So that increases the numbers. But listen, you don't get those opportunities unless you're lowering your shoulder, running hard, running with forward lean. And one quick thing that we haven't mentioned so far, I thought they started having a lot more success when they started going outside with B-Rob and getting away from Grady Jarrett in the middle of the line. And they didn't have to use a lot of smoke and mirrors to get the running game going. Yep. I just think they made a simple adjustment of going more outside zone. Yeah,
they've been doing a lot of, Brian Robinson, you're between the guards, really, not even between the tackles. He's your between the guards guy. Antonio Gibson's you're more so on the edge, but a little bit off the tackle and everything else. And I think that they were basically waiting to show that Brian Robinson could also hit the edges until they needed to. Don't unveil your weapons until you need to unveil them. The Atlanta Falcons kept things close. They kind of made things a little bit interesting here and there. So I think this was the time for Scott Turner to unveil that he's also got another running back who's a little bit bigger and packs a little bit more of a punch, who can also hit the edge. Brian Robinson rewarded him again, 20 total touches, over 120 yards, and a touchdown. We've been saying for a couple weeks now that the Brian Robinson game was coming. He felt it coming. We felt it coming. There it is. Hopefully you started him on your fantasy team. If you didn't, he doesn't care anyway, but hopefully you did.
Listen, all he cares about is winning reality football games. And by the way, my little quip about the Garts, that was a Jay Gruden specialty for long-time Washington football fans. You know.
The only Gruden I know is John.
Well, I know Jay.
Yeah.
Did I say John?
No, you said Jay. I'm just saying the only one I know is John.
Jay once famously quipped when asked about Josh Doxson, a former first-round receiver in Brandon Chair, and why first-rounder. He said, well, it got me a Gart, or they got me a receiver and a Gart. In the Jay Gruden accent, they got me a Gart. So we still ask him about
Josh Doxson, TCU legend, future All-Pro wide receiver.
Not a Washington NFL.
What the draft gurus said at the time,
NFL
along with Laquan Treadwell.
He was soft as the vanilla ice cream I just had to throw out here in the press box. Yeah. Thanks again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and watch of the day. Be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast with Peter Bukowski and friends, from games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports. Go beyond the scenes and the scoreboard with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, it's available on Odyssey, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to hop in, it's 301-615-3577 on the voicemail, 301-615-3577 for David Harrison, who's covering the Washington Commanders for SI.com, FanNation, and Commander Country. I'm Chris Russell, one half of the Russell and Medhurst Show, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern Time. Always live and free and on demand on the Odyssey app as well. Thank you for joining us right here. Be safe getting home and out and about still with the holidays. And thank you for joining us right here. The Locked On Commanders podcast.